Hi and welcome. I'm sitting here again with Svagito, and today we wanted to talk about the art of working with people, which is something that he has been practicing and doing for many, many years.
25 years I've been teaching that because I'm very interested in the space the therapist is in when he works with people. Because in most trainings, you learn a method or a technique. You always learn what to do for the client. But for me, being with Osho for a long time, I learned how important it is. But what really heals in therapy is not the method, but your presence and your ability to be in a loving space. So meditation and love are the two main ingredients in healing. And for that, it is important to be as a therapist in a space where you are present and when you are in a loving space. So I like to examine which space a therapist is in and what helps him to be in that space of presence and what takes you out of it. So we have, I do many trainings where we focus more on that and less on the method and the technique that we use. One of the most important things for a therapist is to have no goal, no intention. And then less intention you have, the more you can be in the here and now and in the present moment. Then of course you can use some technique, but they are not the main ingredient of a session.
Yeah, it is a kind of paradox, isn't it? Because in a way, there's always an intention in a session. That the client comes with an intention; they want to get help with a problem, and in a way, you're there as a therapist, so you're there to help them. But this helping is a bit tricky, isn't it?
Well, the usual thing is, the ordinary way is you think the help is from outside. So you go to a therapy, you think something is wrong with me and I need some fixing, just like you take a car to a mechanic. And the inner world is not like this. In the inner world, there is no fixing that is needed. You are always perfect, you are always whole. So the healing is not coming from outside, it is more inside you. It's an inner realization that I'm already the way I should be. Nothing is missing. So it's totally different in the inner world than it is in the outer world. In the outer world, there's improvement, there's fixing, there is all these kind of things. And in the inner world, it's not like this. So many people treat themselves, and also therapists treat their clients like that, as if something is wrong and it needs fixing. And for me, this is a basic misunderstanding.
So when a client comes to you, what do you offer?
Well, I offer them my own time, my own, that I'm there, I'm with you now, and I offer them uh, my experience that I have with my own growth. I share that, and also certainly some of the skills I also have, and I also learned working with people. So it's not that you don't need to study and learn some skills. That is also necessary, but then you have to also be ready to forget your skills and not be so identified. So in a way, you have to do a very contradictory thing. You have to learn a lot, and then you have to be ready to forget it and not be too identified with it. So both these things are necessary. Well, skill is, of course, you need to learn a little bit about conditioning, about certain ways of working with people. You need to learn about projection. You need to learn the method you use. You need to learn how that works. You need some understanding of the human psyche. So these are all skills that you learn, and you learn in a training, and then you have practiced them. This is good and necessary, but it is not the main ingredient in my view. The main ingredient is your own space, your own presence, and also your ability to be in a loving space with a client, because basically we all need love. Therapy gives his time and his presence and his heartfulness for this 1 hour and shares that with a client. And that is what heals, what is healing, because basically love heals. And that also means we need to have a little understanding what love actually is, because that is a big misunderstanding from our conditioning, that we all have a wrong idea about love. The first wrong idea is usually that people think love has something to do with being nice. And that is absolutely wrong. Being nice is out of fear. You are nice to somebody because you want this person to love you. So you're afraid this person will reject you. That's why we are nice. But love is not like this, because love is not coming out of fear. Love is basically fearlessness. So love is more connected to being true, to being authentic, than to being nice. So one of the first things we have to learn is to distinguish that.
Yeah, so that's probably a common mistake that people working with people make, that they try to be too nice and they want the other to be happy with the session and they want a certain outcome. Are there
Yes.
other mistakes that you see a lot of people doing, or that you address in your
Well,
trainings?
these are the main mistakes. And then another thing which is also related to that is this intention to help. This is almost like a helper's disease or helper syndrome. We want to help or save the other from something. This is so widely spread in the helping profession, and it never helps really. So the intention to help someone is a disturbance. And it has a psychological background because it comes from our wish to save or help our own parents when we were small. So it didn't work with our parents. Now we try it with a client, no? So we try to help and save a client, no? So this can go quite far. So some therapists say, they even worry about their client, what happens to them after their session is over. And this is a kind of interference in somebody's life. So one should give oneself the space for 1 hour, and then one should leave the client alone. One should not even investigate really what happened with my client now. Because this is all, then you lay a burden on the other. In a session is really to leave the other free. You share yourself. I remain free as a therapist, and my client also remains free always. So that's love is also related to freedom. Love doesn't impose anything on anybody. It's a bit like we all know this when after a massage session, the massage therapist asked you, and how did you like it? And it's always unpleasant to be asked such a question. It lays a burden on you. Okay, I have to now please my therapist, so my therapist is happy and glad that he did a good session. So this is not something one should ask. Yeah, therapist has to have a sense himself about what was good and what was not good, not ask the client.
Mm.
This is of course a beginner's mistake, but it shows our attitude of wanting to be loved. And we all have that, but it should not become such an importance in a session. I have my own sense as a therapist. I love myself. I like my work. I like what I do. And I don't need that my client approves of that. And this is important in my view.
So what about people who work with people and they see a client repeatedly, like over weeks and weeks, maybe once a week? Then
Mhm.
it's maybe more difficult to keep it fresh like that.
Yeah, because you establish a certain relationship. It's like another relationship also, no? That is in a way the danger. So for me, the therapeutic relationship is actually a no relationship. It's a one-sided relationship. Otherwise, it creates dependency. And that is when you do a series of sessions, this is a tendency because projection starts. The client projects something on the therapist and vice versa also. We call this in psychology, this is called transference and countertransference. And I like to keep this kind of thing to a minimum by not taking over any responsibility for the client. So from the very beginning, I keep the responsibility with my client. I don't take responsibility for my client. And when I don't do that, then projection or transference also happens, but it is not encouraged. It is kept to a minimum in a way.
And what can that be practically so people can follow? Like, what can that be? How would a client want the
For
therapist to be?
example, a client asks me, I have this problem, what should I do? And then I answer, I don't know what you should do. How should I know? I don't know you. You just come and I don't know you. I don't know your life. How you can expect me to tell you what you should do? You need to find it yourself, kind of. So we can work around an issue and then you will discover what you have to do. But it's not that I tell you what you should do.
Yes, so advice is not
Advice everybody likes to give and nobody likes to take.
exactly.
So advice is cheap therapy. Therapy is not an advice giving situation. It is a situation where you help a client to make a personal direct experience. And out of that experience, they will know something and they have a more clarity about what they need to do and not do. But I don't need to say that.
Mhm. And sometimes I've heard you say that in a way, this loving space that we provide when we're working with a client, it's a little bit like a parent's. We give what the client lacked from a parent, but then it's very important that we don't step into the place of the parent, that we remember we're not really the parents here.
Yeah, so for me, it is a bit like this. Of course, clients, sometimes they didn't get something from their parents. Maybe their parents were traumatized and they couldn't be present for their client, so they missed something. Then in a way, the therapist sometimes gives something to a client what they couldn't get from their parent. But it is not taking over the position of a parent. So I always need to feel respect for my client's parents. I'm not putting myself in the position of being a better parent. I'm only, let's say, do something that the parent couldn't do for some reason. But I always do that with respect for the client's actual parents. So I don't allow the client to put me in a position to replace his parents. So there is a kind of important and subtle difference between these two.
And how would you describe the difference? Like, is that like an inner awareness you have, or is it something you do or don't do?
Well, it is the inner awareness that from the very beginning, when a client talks, I feel, can I feel love and respect to his mother and father? And only if I can feel that, then I can really do something for the client. If I feel, oh, this mother, what a terrible mother it was, then it's not so good.
Say
Then I have
something
to
more
do it.
about why. I think that's important.
Well, because then I have a judgment, then I have a judgment not only about the client's mother, but also about the client. Then I'm not really open to my client and I'm not really loving my client, because I can love my client only if I also love his parents. We are our parents. We are something else or something more also, but we are also our parents. So one can love a person really only if one also feels a certain love towards the parents of the other person. And that's not only true in therapy, that's true in all relationships.
Yeah, and maybe that's what the client needs help with, actually, is to open to one of the parents that he or she judged before.
That's right.
And you can't help the client do that unless you can feel it
Yes.
yourself.
So in a session, I need to be able to do that step that my client has not done yet. And if I can do that step, then I can be of help to my client to also take that step.
And of course, in a way, it's easier, isn't it, when you're further away?
Sure. It's also good always to remember, when sometimes therapists, they think they know exactly what goes on in a client and what they need and so on. And I always need to remember that what I see about a person is always only a small fragment about his totality, about who he really is. So maybe I see some aspect of him very clearly, but it's also good to remember that this is always an aspect and never know the totality of another person. So even a person behaves in a different way than I thought he would or should or something like that, I need to respect that, because what I have seen in a session is a fragment. And also what happened in his life and when he was growing up with his parents, I always know only a fragment. I try to tune into that and maybe I get an insight about that, but I can never know everything. So a little humble attitude of a therapist is kind of quite appropriate here. Not to be so much feeling like you are an expert and you know where the journey should go. For me, I like to be somebody who accompanies a client rather than guiding a client. So I'm not a guide. I'm more there to give a hand and we walk together for a little bit and then we walk alone again.
And of course, oftentimes the client wants guidance.
Yeah, because we don't like to take responsibility for ourselves. That's such a common thing. We want somebody to tell us what to do. We may never follow what the other says, but it gives us a good feeling that there's somebody who takes responsibility for us and for our life. And to do it ourselves, this is often an unpleasant and uncomfortable feeling because, we have to do something ourselves. And then the point is, if you don't take responsibility, then we give also our freedom away. So only if you take responsibility, you also have freedom. And for me, this is a very important point in a session, to always leave the responsibility to everything with the client. And even in trauma situations, where you feel a client is really overwhelmed by something, the client also always has the resource to handle his issue, his problem. He may have lost contact with that resource, but the resource is there somewhere. So my work is more to help a client to come in contact with that resource that is actually there somewhere, rather than me becoming the resource. Even so, a therapist is a resource, but it's more like a temporary thing where you really help a client to find that himself again. So even a client appears helpless, he's not. So this is good to remember. Otherwise, some therapists, they treat their client as if they are a child. I always hate that.
Yeah, and then they become too important themselves.
Yeah.
I really like this image of a therapist being like a midwife.
Yeah.
because it's more supporting a process that is natural and is happening,
Yeah.
but it can still help to have
Yeah.
someone there when you go through such a thing.
Of course. I mean, the danger in therapy is exactly that somebody is taking the role of somebody who knows, and the client is somebody who doesn't know. And that is the danger, which in meditation is much better, because in meditation there's nobody else. So it is quite clear you have to do it all alone. So it's much more clear that you are responsible when you meditate, because you do something on your own. And in a therapy, there can be easily this tendency where you give a responsibility away. So this is a danger. So because there is always somebody, you know, and when we are relating to somebody, we always look easily at the other person and we forget ourselves. So that's one reason also why I like to combine therapy always with meditation, where you always come back to yourself and to your essential aloneness.
Yeah, because you wrote this book, The Zen Way of Counseling. Is that the Zen in the counseling? Can you say something more about that?
The Zen is basically the meditation part. That means, yeah, without meditation for me, therapy can't really work. Therapy has to be always combined with meditation. So because the mind really is a problem creating mechanism. So you solve one problem and then the mind creates another one and another one and another one. And meditation is not about solving a problem. It's about stepping out of the identification with the mind. So when you step out of the identification with your mind, all your problems are basically solved without having touched them. So this is a different approach. This is the difference between East and West. East is stepping out of the mind, and the West is working with the mind, so solving problems, but you stay within the mind. So I always feel the important part is meditation, and I always try to get people interested in meditation in a way that they feel they understand what meditation is about, you know.
And then there is this, for some people who start on the spiritual path, they use meditation to sort of get around their problems.
Yeah, this is called spiritual bypassing. Yeah.
Yes.
This is a lot of written about it now. This is just when you want to use meditation to avoid a personal issue, you know. You, in a way, you choose the pleasant side and you avoid your own dark side. But the dark side is always has to be also included. You are always both. You are light and dark. So for me, meditation is more about holding a space for both, not getting identified with feeling good or identified with seeing only your beauty. It is about seeing both and being unidentified. You have a dark side, you have a light side. And when you hold space for both, you're not avoiding anything. So meditation can be used as an avoidance, because when you meditate, you can go, you know, somewhere where you don't need to look at something unpleasant, and that's not so good. And then meditation is more like a dissociation, really. Like you dissociate from something and then it doesn't feel, and then you can watch everything. It looks very similar than meditative space, but it is more a dissociated state. And this needs to be distinguished. Sometimes not so easy, you know. So the moment you have a preference, then one has to be alert. Because when you have a preference and when you don't want something, then you have to be alert. For example, when people say, okay, I have done primal. I don't need to look at my relationship with my parents anymore. Okay, but if you have solved your problem with your parents, then what is the problem in looking at the relationship again? Why are you not wanting it then? So there is something, no? When we don't want to go somewhere, that means we need to go there again. Otherwise, there is no problem.
Yes. And then, of course, we can make anything a project. So there are also the people who never stop going to courses or trainings and have doing therapy. And
yeah, that is the other side where you want to create a separate life, which is in the group room, and you don't want to deal with your own life because you don't feel good in it. And then you only, it's like taking a holiday, you know? Then the spiritual work or the group work is just like an entertainment. It makes you feel good. You take a holiday from your ordinary miserable life. But then your life doesn't change, you know. So the work has to be, it's like therapy is like a kindergarten school. You learn how to walk, but then you have to walk in the city also. Otherwise, if you can only work with crutches, you never learn how to walk. At some point, you have to be able to walk anywhere. So the world is our group room, really. It's where we practice what we have learned in therapy. So both is good, you know. Sometimes certainly we need a little rest or break if our ordinary life is too challenging or too painful or stressful. Then we need a break from it, but then use that break time to make a change in our ordinary life also. So I very much like to work with ordinary questions. So spiritual questions, I like to connect them with our ordinary life situation.
Mhm.
Because for me, spirituality is in the ordinary life. It is how you live your life every day. It's not somewhere else.
Mhm. I want to go back to when you talked about the space that the or the state that the therapist is in, that is helpful for the client. Um, can you say something more about why? Like, is that because of that we tune in, like there's this co-regulation thing happening, or transmission, or something else?
It's actually very simple. If you go to the hospital where there are many sick people, and you notice you start feeling also a little uncomfortable, you start feeling a little sick. When you go to a place where there are many happy people, even you were unhappy before, you suddenly start feeling also more happy. So it's to do with that. Everything is infectious, sickness and health also. If you're around healthy people, you feel more healthy. If you're around sick people, you feel more sick. So a therapist who is a real therapist has to emanate that sense of health, and that it has to do with his presence, his relaxation, his kindness. That has to kind of emanate from him. If that is not there, then even he is an expert in a certain method, it is not, it doesn't transmit to the client, you know. So that's why, in a way, one could say an enlightened person is the greatest therapist, because he is health. So other therapists, maybe they can be in such a space for a little while during a session or once in a while during a session. But even that, short moments, these are the most important parts in a session. This is where something transmits, where the client feels nourished, or his being is nourished, or his heart receives something. Yeah. So for me, this is important, you know. So there are people who know all the method and somebody else who may know less of the method, but the other person may be more having a healing effect on a client than the person who is an expert. Who knows, you know?
So if we are working as therapists or working with people, then it's actually quite important that we maintain our own health in a way, that we make sure that
That's
we take
right.
care
And
of
have
ourselves.
That's right. And have done our homework first. For me, a therapist who does not know meditation or doesn't know that space of meditation within himself, I can't imagine how this person can help anybody. That's my take on things. Doesn't mean necessarily that everybody has to do everyday meditation, maybe, but for other people, they have a certain quality of meditativeness. And that is what is healing. And of course, it also means we have to tackle to a certain degree our own issues and our own identifications. That's why we have to work on ourselves first.
Mhm.
Maybe this is enough, no?
I had one more, but let me see if it comes back. So what do you do to keep the joy in working, in your work? Because I know you've worked with people for a long, long time. What makes it still exciting or interesting?
Well, what makes it interesting is that everybody I meet is different. So even I may use with the same therapy technique or method, or I use certain things, but each person is different. So there is never any repetition in that sense. That's why I don't like also just to lead courses with only exercises or structures, because they tend to be a bit repetitive. But when you work with an individual, nobody's the same. So that makes it always exciting. It means you meet so many different landscapes. There's no end to it. That makes it very exciting for me. And then, of course, it is a personal thing. I like to investigate, you know, so you need to have a little bit sense of enjoying being a little detective, you know, to detect where is the root of a problem, you know. If you have an interest in that, I have that. That's why I like to investigate. And then also to, you know, I'm very grateful, you know, you can hang out with people and you meet in love, you know. This is very nourishing. So I get a lot also from giving sessions. And I learn about myself, of course, because what I say to somebody, I also need to listen to, of course. So it is always good to teach what you yourself need to learn, because then you say something and you say, oh, that's really true. I need to remember that myself. You know? Because sometimes things come to you from an empty space, and it's not that you are so capable of doing that yourself. So you also need to remind yourself about that as well. So that keeps it very interesting.
And now we've been talking a lot about therapy, but of course, what you teach can be used in working with people in any way, and in life in general. Wouldn't you agree?
Sure, because everything is the same. Whatever you do, life is about love, no? Are you able to be here and now? Are you able to open your heart? That is not related specifically to any specific situation. That's universal. And yeah, and then remembering when you can do that and when you're not able to do that. And then especially not judge yourself if you're not able to do that. Yeah. Because many moments every day you fail, you know. Your mind comes in and then you fail, and then you always forgive yourself and you say, okay, I love myself anyway. That is quite an art to learn, I think.
But it's only when we are looking for a specific result that there is failure.
Yeah, or when we are too much driven by goals or ambitions, which is very easily happens in our modern world. You know, we want this to get done, or we want to reach somewhere, or we're in a hurry to go somewhere, or we have some idea how this should be. I have that a lot often, and I have to keep on coming back, you know. So we have some plan, and then you are not here now, you know. This is so common in our modern world, no?
Yeah. Very good. So for people who are listening, I want to share that you can get the Zen way of counseling, a meditative approach to working with people, on Amazon, right?
You can buy it on Amazon or from my website. And then also every year I give trainings in this kind of approach. Next one is in June now.
And I can recommend it very warmly. I've learned a lot about this experiencing the difference of being present inside while being with someone, and when I get lost in the other or trying to help. And it's quite a big difference. So I was very grateful to explore that in a group like that. So it's good to remind oneself and yeah, just keep practicing.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Svagito.
Thank you very much. Nice talking with you.